everybody. It's great to be back with you here on Dope Nostalgia. Of course, my name is Naomi, and I love being the host of this show. So thank you so much for your listenership. I'm glad that we are starting to get a few people that listen every week and love the show. So please write us. Actually, I was thinking of something cool. I thought you guys maybe had some yearbook photos from the 90s. If you have any of those and you want to snap a picture of them, or what, I guess you can just snap a picture of them. Does anyone use scanners anymore? I don't know how you do that now. If you have a way of digitalizing your yearbook photo from the 90s, send it to us, at dopenostalgiapodcast@gmail.com. And we might feature it on our Instagram, or, it'll be really cool. We'll have a little collection of your photos from the 90s. For this episode, I got to speak to an amazing music correspondent, blogger, radio host, publicist, amazing dude, Eric Alper. Now, obviously, originally, when I first started talking with him, I was trying to get a hold of some of the artists for the show. He told me a lot of people that he represents, and we've discussed possibly getting some of them on the show. But then I said, you know what? I want you on the show. I want to talk to you, because you've had a very storied history of working in the music business, and you started in the 90s, and I want to know all about it. What a fascinating conversation I had with Eric, and now I want to tell you a little bit more about his career straight from where.
Wikipedia moments.
Eric Alper is a Canadian music correspondent, blogger, radio host, and former Director of Media Relations at E1 Music Canada, based in Toronto, Ontario. Eric now runs a music public relations company, That Eric Alper, and is the host of That Eric Alper Show on Sirius XM. Before starting his own PR company, Alper was the Director of Media Relations for E1 Music Canada for 18 years, working with Bob Geldof, Natalie McMaster, Matt Dusk, Randy Bachman, Ringo Starr, Slash, The Wiggles, Snoop Dogg, The Smashing Pumpkins, Ray Charles, Sinead O'Connor, and Sesame Street. Currently, he is a music correspondent to CTV, CBC Radio 2, Rogers, Bell, Shaw Communications, and Evanoff. He is also a regular contributor to Sirius XM, TSN Radio, Dog FM in Ottawa, and CJBK in London, Ontario. Alper has been named to Billboard Magazine, Pace Magazine, and the National Post the best on social media, having become one of Canada's best-known and in-demand influencers with over 1 million followers on Twitter, and his blog, thatericalper.com, receiving over 125,000 hits a week. Eric Alper is the father of Hannah Alper, a Canadian activist, blogger, and motivational speaker who addresses issues such as the environment, anti-bullying, and social justice. You can definitely check him out on Twitter. As I said, he has a lot of followers and a very entertaining Twitter feed, as well his blog, thatericalper.com. Check it out. And welcome to the show, Eric Alper.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Wonderful. What part of Canada are you in?
I'm in Toronto.
Okay, I'm out in Edmonton.
Yeah. Okay. You beat me in terms of coolness in cities. Are you at stage 3 yet?
We are in stage 3.
Yeah. What's that like?
It's sometimes a little bit scary, but actually it just went into place that masks will be mandatory in all public places as of Saturday.
Yeah. You have a really great voice. It's coming through so good here. And I like the background. It's very Frankie Goes to Hollywood with the lasers. It feels like I can touch the lasers if I do this. Hang on. Pow, pow. like that.
Remember those old school, can you hear me still?
Yep.
You remember those old school Jostens photos you had?
Oh, that's right.
This was one of the backgrounds I remember having.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's make sure that we never go back to those times ever again.
School photos?
School photos, yeah.
Remember, in like the Sears Portrait Studio. Yeah.
Right. Where you take a picture like this, and then you have to take a picture like this.
And there'd be a cameo in the corner of the other picture
right.
looking at you all creepily.
Right. Look to the future. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I remember I was talking to you about the different artists that you represent through email, and
Yeah.
I decided I'd rather, at this point, I wanted to get to know you as a publicist and doing PR and what this line of work is like for you, especially in your early days in the 90s.
Yeah.
Who have you represented the longest, and what is your current roster of talent like?
Who I have represented, I'm going to say probably either 5440 or Andy Kim the longest. Both were signed to a record label called E1. And when I left to do my own PR company about 4 years ago this summer, they came along with me. So a lot of artists that I was working and doing PR at the record label for all those years just ended up just continuing with me. So, artists like Downchild Blues Band or Bruce Coburn, Buffy St. Marie, artists that were signed to True North Record that are still signed to that label. I'm still doing the PR for that label. So
Mhm.
probably I'm going to say probably if I have to get probably Andy Kim. I've worked with him for about 10, 12 years now.
That's awesome. Like Andy Kim, tell me, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that "Baby, I Love You"?
That's the one. And you already knew that. You just needed an excuse to sing in your beautiful voice.
I
But
didn't
that's
know
the
that.
one.
That was the one that I was thinking of when I related the name to the song in my head. But
Right. Yeah. He also co-wrote the Archie Sugar Sugar, and then recorded Rock Me Gently and was his own record label for that and his own publisher for Rock Me Gently back in 1974. And then a number of
ah,
years ago, put out an album called It's Decided and put it out on the Marvelous Arts and Crafts record label that's headed up by Kevin Drew of Broken Social Scene. So, so we've been working together for a couple of albums now and worked with him throughout his Canada's Walk of Fame induction and also to the Canadian Music Hall of Fame and the Songwriter Hall of Fame in Canada. So it's been an amazing ride with him.
now, in how does the PR business work when you first started and got into the game? You were mentioning it was around the 90s when this was the beginning of your career. Do artists come to you or vice versa?
Yeah, I had I started a record label the day after I graduated university back in I'm gonna probably say 1993. I made a list of all the things that I can do with my life after graduating from York University, but I also worked at the campus newspaper and the campus radio station. I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was about 12 years old. From the time I was 8, I saw the movie called American Hot Wax. And it
Hmm.
told the story of the DJ Alan Freed, who was the first person to really play rock and roll on a regular basis back in the mid 1950s. And when I saw that movie and it had real life musicians in it, like Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry, and it told the story of the early stages of rock and roll. When I saw that as an 8-year-old kid, it was like, that's what I want to do. But I knew I had no musical talent whatsoever, and I still don't. So I had to quickly figure out over the course of years, how I was going to enter into this world. And this world to me was like how certain people saw Star Wars or Harry Potter or that kind of fictional world of like, just how on earth am I going to be a part of this? And, as a teenager, I realized in getting a subscription to Billboard magazine that there were record labels and there were distributors and there were publicists. And the publicists to me were like the coolest people because they got to share the stories of the musicians, but also not really have to worry so much about the profits and losses and who's selling what. They just needed to kind of work with really great people. So when I made the list, I started a record label foolishly, and that led to being to having a booking agency because nobody would come and see the artist play in order to buy the records. And then I realized that without publicity, nobody was going to come and see the bands play that I just spent so hard booking. And then I just dropped everything and I became a publicist. So the first little bit, I was working a lot of independent artists that had no right to have a publicist. I was
Hmm.
cheaper than anybody else. I did it faster than anybody else. And I worked harder and longer hours, sending out faxes through the fax machines and following up and literally working at a normal industry 9 to 5 in the basement of my house, and then going out at night and talking to bands that could afford me because I was so cheap. I was like $100 a month when everybody else was charging $1,000 a month. But I needed to make my mistakes and I needed to screw up a lot in order to continuing to get better. I got a job working for a small record label right afterwards, and that was around 95, 96, 97. And I was working and doing PR for the Nylons, which was an a cappella band from Canada, Patricia Conroy, who was big in the country world at the time, and they had just signed a small band out of Alberta called Nickelback. And Nickelback was, they just started making their first EP, so I was working radio and press and television for Chad and the guys doing that, and then they went on to huge fame and fortune after that. And so I was essentially just working those 3 or 4 artists or so until I got a call in 1999 from our distributor of those records. So a distributor job was essentially going to move the CDs from the warehouse to the record stores, and that was it. And he had a genius idea of because all of those labels were American based, they didn't really care about Canada. We were 4% of the world market to them, so they were literally going to spend 4% of their day on the Canadian market. So he hired me in order to be the Canadian publicist for Koch, which then led to Entertainment One. But then that's when I really got to work with the Smithsonian Folkways record label, and Pete Seeger and Jerry Lee Lewis and Ray Charles and Bob Geldof and the Wiggles and Snoop Dogg. And so when working PR in the Canadian market for all these labels, it was wonderful because I got a really great variety rather than working for, say, one record label who only did alternative rock and that was it. And that's where I kind of just started my whole career back in the mid 90s.
It's got to be an interesting world when you can explore all the different genres. Like you said, it's not just one. There's probably a different way about going about doing things in the hip hop world than there is to the rock world. It was amazing being able to work the Wiggles in the morning, Sinead O'Connor in the afternoon, and Guar just before I left, and making sure that the people that were supposed to be getting the Wiggles press release didn't get the Guar press release, because I think that would kind of freak them out. But that's where everything kind of clicked for me. It was so easy for me to do that and to go from one musical style and genre to the next, because that's what I was listening to. I was listening to everything, and I was a fan of everything, and I was always positive about stuff. I never said I never said I don't like that kind of style of music. It was always like, if I didn't know about it, this was my entry point, and they were paying me to find out enough information. So if we didn't have a world music list for the Putumayo record label, and working Habib Kote, that was my job to go and find that list. So I would open up a whole new world, not only of like-minded artists, but how to write for that crowd, how to write press releases, how to talk to that media, because sometimes that was a little bit, how the relaxed atmosphere in talking to a bunch of metalheads who happen to run a blog is much different than talking to a mom of 3 about the Wiggles. So for me, it wasn't about manipulation or trying to fool anybody. It was just being real and just loving everything that my job encompasses, even back then and still to this day, where, I can work somebody in the world music style or folk or roots or jazz or classical or rock or metal, just switching it up, because I think everybody is looking for the same thing. Everybody is looking for a story to write 500 words about, or who's really interesting and fun and pleasurable to talk to for 15, 20 minutes during a phoner, because nobody has time for good music. They only want great music, and nobody has time to, for mean people or not nice people. I don't. I'm sure you don't either. How in this world, I feel like the majority of the music we get is through the top 40. Now it's switched. The radio formats have changed, obviously, from terrestrial radio to Sirius XM and different ways of getting music to people that way. How do you sell a new artist to a public that's waiting for something new? Are they waiting for something new, or do they only want to hear what's on the radio?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that they want something new all the time. Studies have shown over and over again that playing new music on the radio, unless your audience expects that and demands that from the local radio station, they're going to shut it off. People don't like, new music as much as they claim they do when it's somebody that they don't really know. It's
Bingo.
usually, it's really
Bingo.
something like, you trust the local radio DJ, you trust the local radio station, you trust the Spotify playlister, you trust the blog, you trust your family and your friends. And so that kind of gives you that mental capacity to listen to something new, or that, and I'm not even going in there where like, Taylor Swift fans don't want to hear the new album Folklore because it's so different. They want that, and they're diving deep into that record. But
Because
for
it's
the most
her.
part, because it's her and her experiences, as much as you may not know about her, you could just go on social media and come along for her ride of, this is my squad, this is me sleeping on a plane, this is my cats, stream my song, this is, and then reading about her and whatever, if it's like about her relationships or her family or her friends or what she's going through. She's a very open artist, so you kind of go along with what she's able to do for you. But when I first started, there was obviously, there was very little internet radio. I mean, we barely, even to download a photo took almost 3.5 hours. But
Yeah.
you trusted your local radio station, and you trusted those music magazines, whether it was CMJ or Q Magazine or Mojo or Rolling Stone or Spin. And much like we were trusting, Pitchfork in the early 2000s. So I think you still need that entrance point. But for me, working a brand new artist, it's not even a challenge, or it's tougher, or it's easier. It just is. And so sometimes you have to find those right storylines of people to get really excited about, because if I think that they're boring with no story, I can guarantee you that the media won't even look at it. You almost have to write your press release or your bio that the first line has to be great, because they're not even going to read your second line until that first line is perfect. And it's not about seeing the media as adversaries. They're just as music fans as I am, and have been doing it longer in some cases. And they certainly listen to way more music than I have, because they're getting 1,800 press releases a day from around the world. But it's kind of fun to find those roads for brand new artists. It's fun to look at them and say, well, the music's certainly good, but are you doing something different? Are you, I'll give you an example. So during the whole Me Too movement of last year, when it was really, really coming to a head, it seemed like I had about 9 or 10 women artists who all came out really with a song about their feelings and their emotions and their stories. So for me, it was a matter of, well, it's not like who's legit, because they're all legit, but which ones are really going to truly resonate with the media? Because you can go and you can put your music up on Spotify and you can go after your fan base, and you are absolutely legitimately able to tell your story. But when you're dealing with another group of people like the media, maybe they just covered a story about an artist that had a Me Too moment when they were in high school or when they were in school. So you got to stay away from that, because they've already done that. So you look for, well, who had that moment maybe when they were at work, or maybe when they were in the music industry and willing to talk about it. Maybe it was a family member, maybe it was a really close friend. So you try to find with them and walk through with them the objectivity of saying it's a really great song. Maybe we'll certainly go out to the media, because I would never say no to anybody to go out and do a press release. But maybe this won't hit as much as you think, because they already covered it last week. So maybe we spend time in this road, or maybe we kind of maybe think about and kick around ideas about making a fabulous video instead of maybe spending another 3 months working this. So for me, it's just a matter of also just giving them as much experience as I have, and just different options and different opportunities, because not everybody is going to get in the media. Spotify is now uploading anywhere between 45 and 50,000 new songs a day. And double that on Friday. Not everybody is going to get on a playlist, and not everybody's going to get attention, but it's always been like that.
True. And I mean, anyone can be on Spotify. Anybody can.
Anybody. Yeah. I mean, I get those emails of like, hey, this is my first song, and I listen to it, and it's like, that's great. maybe the moment isn't right for you, or maybe it's too new, but go out and get 10,000 streams and show that you can make a connection with your fan base first, and then show the media that something is happening underneath their noses that they may not know about. But that goes back to that last question too. It's like when you're an artist, where do you find those people that trust you, that make you go from 0 streams to 10,000? And if commercial radio isn't going to play you, and maybe the campus radio and community stations are still viable, but they have less and less audience because they're now listening to online radio. They're now listening to Sirius XM. They're now listening to Stingray. They're now listening to you. And so every moment that they're not listening to that radio station, they're doing something else that has come up in the last 20 years. There was no Netflix. There were no HBO. There wasn't 900 channels. So when you're an artist, you have to realize that your competition, if you're a rock band, isn't Bruce Springsteen or isn't Rival Son. Your competition is Netflix. Your competition is going
distractions.
Out. Yes, it's going out for the first time in 4 months during a global pandemic. It was weird and awesome at the same time. And I probably sound like such a bad person for saying this, but like when the start of the pandemic hit, I went outside in my backyard and I had a nice scream for about 4 minutes because I went from 950 tour dates on the schedule to 0. I still had about, 30, 35 artists I was working. But I went back and I emailed everybody and I said, look, I'm still going to work. I'm still here. Let's ramp up your singles. Let's ramp up the amount of focus tracks that you do. Let's see let's see how many videos you can make. And I had artists that were making 7, 8, 9 different videos for the one song. I have one band that was right in the middle of recording a 3-song EP. They got one song finished before the pandemic hit, and they've made 7 different videos for it once every 2 weeks. They made a lyric video, an official video, a live video, an a cappella video, an instrumental version of it, and then another couple of other goofy kind of videos with them. Getting photos from the audience. All of that put the spotlight on them, not just by the media, but on their fan base as well. And enough for me to take this brand new band to another level, because my press releases were like, this band just hit 200,000 views of this song, and look at what they're doing. They're not letting the pandemic stop them.
Yes.
Because at the end of it all, I think the media were just trying to look at and to see, who's going to be devastated by this pandemic and what's going on. And the music industry was absolutely hit, I think, the hardest, because they were the first ones to be locked down, and they're going to be the last one to kind of open up again. But I was busier than I ever have in my entire life in the last 4 or 5 months, because I think everybody is just trying to do something new. But doing a living room show is great when you're one of the first people to do it. When you're the 9,000th artist that day that's going on Facebook, you got to be really great to separate yourself from the crowd.
Absolutely. It's like I feel like this has been an opportunity to make lemons out of lemonade, and who's able to do it the most creatively. But after that, then you're just copying the rest.
Yeah.
It's like anything in the music business. Like, you want to be the first to do that.
Yeah, because number 2 through 9 don't matter at all. But again, that's when you're talking about pitching a story to Rolling Stone. There's a club here in Toronto called The Senator, and a couple of weeks ago, it's a jazz club, and a couple of weeks ago, they started to do safe social distancing shows on their balcony. So they have a balcony that goes out onto the street. They blocked up parts of the street. They had chairs and tables that were well apart from one another. Nobody in Canada was doing it. And they ended up on CBC's The National because of that. Now that Toronto is heading into stage 3, anybody with a balcony is going to do that. Well, it's been done. You can still go after the media, but now you got to come up with a fresh new angle, because they've already written about that. And so, but that's part of the music industry in general. It's just trying to be as safe as possible and looking to the past and saying everybody needs to sound like Nickelback now, or everybody now, I can't imagine in the boardrooms of the major labels of Warner, Sony, and Universal, are they telling all of their pop stars, maybe you should do a folk album,
Yeah.
Because it's working. Because how do you put out a dance album after something like that and think that you might be doing anything different? For all I know, this could be that paradigm shift that we didn't even see coming, where the sad, solemn, quieter music starts to hit, because that's mostly the music that's being created in a global pandemic. But even if people listen to this in 2023, long after either we've been overtaken by aliens, or there's 9/10 of the population has died off, or that
And then 1/10 went to Mars.
And 1/10 went to Mars.
Yeah.
The basic idea is still the same. Is your songs are your songs, and they're great, and the music industry is wonderful, but it's still the music business, and like any other business, you have to find something that's different. If you're a nail salon in Toronto, you're competing with 9,000 other nail salons. What makes you so amazing? Well, maybe you have your customer base of the local market or that block, but you want to get into the Toronto Star, you have to be doing something very different to make people go, that's amazing.
What would you do as a publicist? Going back to something you mentioned earlier about people who could be possibly very boring. Say they got the greatest voice in the world, and their music is amazing, but their personality is just nothing. It's dust. It's dry. What do you do to promote a person like that and get them to be a good interview?
Yeah, there's a number of things that I do with certain artists like that. The first is I'll try to get as many stories out of them as possible. Tell me about where the album title comes from. Tell me about the photograph on the album cover. Tell me about this song and this song and this song and this song. And we go through song by song, and they write up 3 to 25 lines about each of the songs, just to find that nugget. Maybe they're too close to the record to see some patterns in there that at the first glance I could see, like it's a series of short stories with a linear effect throughout it. Sometimes you don't put them on television. Sometimes you only get them to do email interviews or phoners where they feel more comfortable. There's a number of artists that hate performing through Zoom or through Skype because they just feel like they don't sound correctly. Actually, even before COVID, there's artists that I was working and I still work who refuse to perform on television because they just believe that that the sound quality coming through the TV is disastrous and actually shows them in a worse light and doesn't help them when they're trying to sell tickets for a tour. So we don't put them on television. We just get them to maybe have a better interview. But I think for the most part, I think everybody, most musicians' worst day ever is better than most people's best day ever. And it's a matter of making sure that they know that they're one of the lucky ones to be able to do what they do and read a lot. I read countless dozen or hundreds of blogs and newspaper articles and magazine stories a week. So I'm always looking for, that's fat. Like, why do I like that? And then I hope that other people do too, which is exactly what my Twitter stream really is. It's just stuff I like that other people happen to like it as well. And I'm able to kind of hopefully transfer those ideas to artists. But sometimes, sometimes it's like when you're in a relationship and they're like, do you love me? And they're like, yes. Well, why do you love me? Sometimes it takes somebody else to answer that question for you. And sometimes that person just happens to be me.
Wow. That's a great way to put it. And I was going to say, sometimes you're going to have the opposite extreme where you have someone who's just too much to handle. Or you might be spending a lot of time doing damage control. Have you ever had to drop a client because their behavior was just like, I'm sorry, like I can't represent you. You're just crazy.
Yeah. There wasn't a single artist in 18 years that I was at Koch and E1 that I purposely stopped working because they just happened to be a not nice person or that their reputation preceded them. And I think part of that was we were in Canada and they kind of, when artists when artists come to this country, they feel so much more relaxed. There's not paparazzi hanging out of their hotel room. They're not looking, the media here
Yeah.
weren't looking for gotcha moments. They weren't asking really prying questions about, well, who are you dating now,
Yeah.
or what about this situation that happened in 1974. We were much more relaxed about everything. And I think, we kind of left it up to the American and the UK Fleet Street media to kind of go for those gossipy types. We didn't, and it's kind of strange to see a number of sites up here in this country, and through no fault of their own, know full well that their competition as an entertainment show in Toronto is TMZ. So they kind of have to play the same game for clicks and streams and likes and shares as much as they are too. So you end up with a little bit more snarky stuff. There's been a number of things this year that I'm kind of surprised at that's coming out in the media, because I think it's not that it's not becoming, but I just thought that we were better than that.
Yeah.
On this, when I went independent, there's been 2 artists in particular in 4 years that I've dropped completely based on an email that they've sent to me, and they were just like, they kind of used language that that was very unbecoming, and I thought, I just can't trust you to not say that kind of stuff in the media, and you're pick your swear word here. But and then the other one was going to post something, and they meant well, but one of them didn't understand why the post that they did of All Lives Matter during the Black Lives Matter movement was offensive.
Yeah.
And they were good people, and I really think that they came from a perspective of, why don't we just care about everybody? And it's like,
Right.
I get it. I get that's where you're coming from, but I will give you the example of, the singer from the Tenors who said that and landed in hot water, or people that have lost their jobs over posting something like that. I understand that there are different people in the world coming from different backgrounds, and sometimes, they may not be as woke as certain people, or certain, and it's a tough world, even if you have 18 followers, if you're still going to post something racist, sexist, homophobic, you can go viral very, very quickly if it gets into the wrong stream.
It's cancel culture. You're literally, you cannot make every tweet you put out there. You have to be very careful about what you do, or it could completely ruin your career.
Yeah. And just letting them know that really, when you get down to it, nobody cares about you. That's a great equalizer of everything is where, whether you have 4 followers or whether you have 1 million or 10 million, nobody really cares what you have to say about this. There's only a handful of people that can actually move the needle to the world. And as much as I admire artists who do want to stand up against certain politicians or certain times, not every, just because somebody is calling out Bruce Springsteen or calling out the Chicks or calling out Ariana Grande or Taylor Swift about not being upfront with who they're going to vote for, it's their personal decision on whether or not if they want to do that.
You're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you're going to get called out for not.
You're going to get called
out
either way. Yeah. Either way, right? You're going to lose half your audience who happen to be, on the other side of the fence with whatever political stance you're on. But, when you're an independent artist, you kind of want to go after everybody. You don't want to necessarily divide your audience right off the bat, unless you are fully prepared to take the heat that that you are going to shoot yourself in the foot in something that may not be required or asked of you. Yeah. But I also get that we're living in very, very different times, that it's almost like you have to have an opinion and you have to take a stand. And look, I grew up in the 80s, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, watching Live Aid and having Bob Geldof and Band Aid and USA for Africa and Northern Lights changed my life about what was expected about an artist. Artists after that movement had to stand with something, whether it was Greenpeace or Amnesty International or against the government or Sweet Relief Musicians Fund. You have to start to do something good, but don't live in a bubble so much that you don't realize that there are other people out there who are standing very much against with what you're doing and who are always going to call you out for being, socially aware. Yeah, they don't really think that you're so socially aware. They just may think that you're the biggest idiot that walked the planet.
Or that you're bandwagoning.
Yeah. And then you end up with the whole influencer game of Black Lives Matter, buy my swimsuit, and kind of latching on to stuff like that. So, there's been very few times when I've dropped somebody, and mostly because I can. Because being your own boss and having your own company, you don't have to work with everybody. You don't have to have those people just because they're going to pay your bill. I have people that do that. I'm doing fine. I don't need to worry about it. I can spend the next remaining, X amount of years of my life in this business just working with good, kind people that I want to hang out with.
Isn't that a nice way to do things? I would say.
Yeah,
you're not at the beginning of your career where you're just willing to do any job.
Totally.
Just like in any career path, I guess.
Absolutely. And those are really good lessons to learn. Because sometimes it's telling you what you don't want to do rather than what you should be doing. And those are easily the most important lessons for me, in not only doing this and having my own company, but the way that I run my life and the way that I work within the family with my wife and daughter. All of that is based on the things that we don't want to do. When my daughter wanted to get into activism at a really early age, and before she wrote her book at 17 years old, a lot of the companies and influencer campaign that she was getting, we turned down way more stuff than what she actually got. And part of that was that we didn't have to do everything. We didn't need it to do the money. We didn't care about not having 1 million followers. So that kind of stuff, whether you want to go into the music industry or whether you want to write, whether you want to work with a big corporation, whether you want a job at a law firm that will defend people full well or against the environment, you have a choice to be able to do. The school, you can't blame the school, you can't blame the government, you can't blame society. You still have the ability to run a sweet, happy life. And maybe you don't have 4 boats. Maybe you can go on vacation once a year, but at least you get to go to sleep at night knowing that you did good.
Isn't that what matters? And I mean, I was doing some research about what was going on with you, and I read about your daughter, Hannah, making a lot of positive in the world. It's nice that she can do that from a pure and true place. Because,
coming from and when your dad's a publicist, not only do you get that affordability of not making you do the things that you don't want to do. But hopefully, in working with my wife, who's pretty smart when it comes to this stuff as well. And she does social media for a number of companies, but it's also she's just smart. We know what the pratfalls are. We know what the potential damages could be. And because we see it every day, we not only see it with people that have completely screwed up their lives, being mean or tweeting or posting horrible things. But you've got to be a parent first. And I certainly grew up with a great family that was full of love and attention, but it was also just continuing to do the right things. And hopefully I'm passing that on with my wife over to Hannah.
That's beautiful. I'm glad to hear what she's been doing. And I'm hoping, where can people follow what she's doing, what Hannah's been up to?
Yeah, they can go to callmehannah.ca for her website, or they can just track her online on Twitter and Instagram at that Hannah Alper.
Thank you.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Analog Brewing, winner of 3 awards at the 2020 Alberta Beer Awards, is a proud sponsor of the Dope Nostalgia podcast. Analog Brewing is now offering delivery within the city of Edmonton with no delivery fee on orders over $40. Go to analogbrewing.ca/shop. That's www.analogbrewing.ca/shop and place your order today. When placing an order, you could also pay it forward and take part in their Nurse a Pint program and prepay for a pint for a nurse. Mention this podcast in the order comments so they know we sent you. Analog Brewing, taking beer to the next level.
Saturday mornings are slamming on CBS with Dinky Little Dinosaur. You sure? The California Raisins.
We're the kings of rock and roll.
The Muppet Babies.
Now what?
Pee-wee's Playhouse. Come on over. And Garfield and Friends. Yeah. Saturdays.
Now, how did you get started in doing a Sirius XM radio program?
There was before Your Morning, which is the national morning show on CTV, there was a program called Canada AM. And I used to go with all of the artists whenever they were doing interviews and performing on that show. And I got asked to do, they just said, hey, you kind of know a lot of the music that's going on, and a lot of the people in the industry. Do you want to do a segment on the best box sets of the holiday season? So I just called up all my friends who work at the major labels and everybody, and I said, hey, I get to do this segment. I've never been on television before. I'm not on the radio. I'm just a publicist. I'm just a guy who just does his thing. But I did well enough on there. I talked about the different box sets. I never slammed anything. I didn't say nobody needs this box set. It was all like, here's the really fun stuff. And I was always positive about everything. And so that led to more and more segments. So whenever somebody died, I would come along and go on camera and talk about their lives in 4.5 minutes. And then I started doing more radio stuff. And then when the Junos or the Grammys came up, I would be called on to talk about it. But I think partly, I was not only a music fan, but I was somebody from the industry that gave them a little bit more credibility. But I was also somebody that turned down a lot of things whenever, Justin Bieber got into trouble with his smoking or partying. I always kind of had a little bit of an attitude about not doing those kind of stories, or when somebody ended up in legal battle, I wouldn't go there because I didn't want to be the one that said, oh, Eric Alper says this. And I didn't want to be that person.
There's enough of that in the world already. You don't need to participate in it.
Well,
right?
I mean, not only did I need not to participate in it, but at the time when I was working for Koch and E1, I didn't want it to be E1's Eric Alper thinks that Justin Bieber is getting a bad deal, and then going against some legal battle. So I didn't want to tarnish the name and the reputation of the company I was working for, because they were so gracious enough to offer me the ability to talk about artists that weren't on their label. So I had that going for me as well. I started doing these weekly segments about new music on the Ward and Al show on Sirius XM. And then one day, after about 1.5 years, the director of talk radio said, do you want your own show? And I was like, no, why would I want that? And I was happy not being responsible for anything. I would come on, I would talk about the things that people want to talk about, and that was it. And he said, well, you get to do what you want to do. You go talk to 4 people a show in an hour for 15 minutes, have a light, breezy conversation. You seem to like people, so go for it. And so I did it, and I loved it. I loved talking to artists, not so much about the inside baseballness about what they do, because I don't understand it. I don't care how they got that guitar tone. I have no idea how they did it. And chances are people out there may not know or care about that either. That's for like Guitar Magazine to figure out. I just want to, I want to talk about like what it's like having a number 1 hit and all of a sudden everybody loves you and then you stop having hits. Like I want to know about your human psyche, on what it's like to write a hit in the comfort, in the seclusion of your own home, and then find out that everybody loves it, or what's the song that they thought was going to be a hit and why they think that it wasn't. So a lot of the times it's just about how people got their start, but also mostly hopefully giving that conversation that it doesn't matter if you're a fan of that artist, maybe there's something that they can teach you about that as well. Much like you and I are talking right here. I talk to some of the biggest artists in music, and then also, artists that are just starting out that I love, that I think, can have a really fun conversation with for 15, 20 minutes a segment and kind of move on to the next one. So I've been doing it now for just over 5 years. And in some weeks, it's the only person I actually talk to over the phone or in person rather than just through email.
Isn't it true? This is how we keep in touch now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you're in Edmonton. So, having the podcast, you either have, you have a couple of choices. You can go after the people that are touring in your market. And, you would never hear no from me from talking to any of the artists that I have, no matter what city you're in, because I'm just happy anybody wants to talk to artists that I have. But, sometimes when you're in Edmonton or Calgary or Sudbury, Ontario, it's tough to get people to come to you when you're a stopover, where you're a layover of a tour date. And sometimes, you just want to be able to have and start that podcast and say, well, it doesn't matter where you are. I can talk to you whenever you're free. And that's a genius thing about all of this is like, we don't even have to be in the same room, but have that lovely conversation.
It's true. I mean, yeah, you could do this from pretty much anywhere now. And you also gave me some good advice, and that is to make sure that when you do approach the person to want to have that conversation, let's also make sure the focus is on what you're doing now as opposed to the past.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you and I had that talk, because sometimes
I'm very glad you expressed that,
because I
really.
don't normally do that, but I loved what you were doing so much, and I loved the idea, and I love the way that the past shows came across, and I was like, if there's because here's the thing, I've been through it not only as a publicist, but I've been through it with my show too, where I'll get publicists telling me about an artist, actually a lot of artists I talk to, and I love to talk to artists from the 80s and 70s and 90s, because that's the music that I grew up on. So of course I'm going to be a fan of somebody. And I'll give you examples. So there's a number of artists. If I'm talking to John Anderson from Yes, who has 95 albums to his credit, I love 90125, which came out in 1984. It was, to me, such an amazing album, and I never liked the prog stuff. I never got into Yes. I never got into early Genesis. I never got into Emerson, Lake and Palmer and 19-minute songs. Still don't care for it all. But I was told by the publicist, hey, look, don't talk about this. Don't talk about the past a lot. John loves to talk about what he's doing. And I'm like, awesome, great, happy to do that. So even a guy like me, whatever stature I have on this big planet, I'm still told, hey, look, artists spend a lot of time and energy and money creating something that they know is not going to sell as much as when they were selling millions of albums around the world. But it's no less important to them. And it also gives you a little bit of a perspective of where they are now and where they're thinking. And sometimes if you get them to talk about stuff, even if you're interviewing Ringo Starr, and I have to tell you, please don't bring up the Beatles. If Ringo brings up the Beatles, it might be a little fair game, because then when he says they, when we were kids, who's we? Are you talking about the Beatles? and then you can start, gliding into that. But like everything else, people, these musicians are human beings, and they never want, no matter who it is, no artist wants to believe that their best work was behind them. And
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to make them feel bad, that even though, because at the end of the day, the amount of things that have to go right for an album release or a film or a TV show or a book or a company, the amount of things that have to go right is astounding. Mm-hmm. When you're releasing your album on a major label, there are thousands of people that get to help you out. Promotion, radio, press, publicity, marketing, sales, album cover, graphics, liner notes, Spotify people, this person, that person. So many things have to work correctly. It's amazing. Anything works out. There are artists that will go to their deathbed saying and claiming that their newest album was the best work that they've ever put out. And in some cases, I believe them. Maybe they just don't have that team of 10,000 people working on a major label for them, but it's certainly no less appointment. So when we were having that conversation by email about a specific artist, it was like, you know, just warm them up. Just ask them one or two questions about the new album, and I'm sure that they're just going to make them feel good because, you know, we're all like that. But sometimes it's those little kind of tips and tricks on, you know, oh, you're not just with me because I've sold 5 million albums back in the 80s and I'm here for your hits. It's a kind of two-way street too. You know, you got to give up something to get something.
Yeah. And the thing is the whole premise of this show is to see, what are you doing now? Let's talk about that as well. As, you know, I want to gloss over some things that were really exciting and some good memories you had of the glorious days that were the number one hit, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I want to know what you're doing now, and that's why I'm contacting you. And I don't want to focus on questions that all the fans that already know the answers to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, you're always going to try to get new fans out there. And, you know, it's remarkable that even after all of the Grammys that Billie Eilish won this year, her streams and scans and sales still went up the next day. And you think, who doesn't have this album? You know, or like when Adele won like 9 Grammy Awards, it was like, there are people still out there who don't know who Adele is. And yes, there are. There's, you know, as far as I know, Billie Eilish hasn't sold 320 million albums in America. And so there's always going to be new people who don't know the story about that person's favorite artist. And sometimes sometimes most of the time though, they're really, really happy to talk about that kind of stuff. They just, you know, they're just sometimes really skeptical of people in the media that they may not know or have that relationship with, that it's like, oh, they're only talking to me because I know that I can bring them my audience. And that's true. Absolutely correct. But they also have an audience out there that's looking for new music and who may not know. So it's a little bit of a nice personal relationship with, you know, because, you know, everybody is going to ask Noel and Liam Gallagher about their relationship with the brothers. So you can ask that first, but you can definitely ask about the possibility of an Oasis reunion as the last question, and knowing full well that that's going to be the headline and they see it coming. Or if you're in Pink Floyd, they know it's coming down, but they know that you have to ask it in order because that's the job for you too. And you know what? You never know if that's the day that Noel Gallagher is going to say, well, I just got off the phone and yes, there is going to be an Oasis reunion next year. You know, you never know. Can you imagine how
on
big
your show?
Right. Or your show. Let's go get him. Let's call Noel now. Let's get him on the phone.
What's a concert that changed your life?
I saw Genesis in 1981 as an 11-year-old boy, and I went with my sister. I was a huge fan of Phil Collins. I love this band, and that was the show still to this day that all shows should be compared to for me. It was the level of excitement, first of all, just the anticipation of going to see your favorite band live as a kid is like nothing matters. And the moments where the lights go down before the artist comes on stage, I think is better than some of the sex that I've had in my whole life. And the knowing the sights and the sounds of being in a community like that and getting contact high, I'm sure, was brilliant. And so I've never forgotten that show. And I think that, you know, you never forget your first kind of experiences like that. But there's been shows like U2 during the Achtung Baby tour that was mind blowing, that, you know, if I see, you know, 5 people on a stage with no lights and no sound and no great graphics, I'm kind of bored, because I think I've seen a lot of really amazing shows. So I think I think the Genesis one and the U2 one definitely have to be right up there.
It's amazing when you can see a show that doesn't rely on all the bells and whistles and still be absolutely mind blown at the experience.
Yeah,
That takes some talent.
my I didn't see Ed Sheeran when he was here, but my wife did, and just raved about it. And I was like, really, really? And then I saw a bunch of live videos. And it was like, man, this is really good. And he didn't even have a band, but it's when the up and coming and the newer artists, they've got their work cut out for them, because a lot of them didn't earn their stripes playing from club to club to club across this country. A lot of them, got their start on social media, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, and they don't know how to command a stage. They don't know what happens when you look over there and half your audience is bored silly because you're not spending time looking at them or watching them. Watch the greats. Watch somebody like Elvis Presley in the mid 50s on how he makes it seem like he is looking at every single person on there. And you learn that from practicing, and not from practicing in your own home, the music that you're creating. It's practicing getting up on stage, playing to two people and the bartender.
Yep. You have to. And you have to play to those two people like you're playing to 10,000 people.
Yeah,
You have to have
for
the
sure.
same energy. And that's hard to get.
Yeah.
Because you feed off how many people are in front of you and the reaction that they're getting. I think that's gold.
That's why when you go back into certain people's history, where I love reading autobiographies or biographies about musicians, and the first 100 pages of a 200-page autobiography is about their start and their early lives, and then they quickly go through all of the hits. And it took me and I always thought, well, that's the stuff that people want to read, is like the really big stuff when you were untouchable. But I thought, no, that's the early stuff is how you got to be that person. And you have to learn how to suck. You have to learn how to be bad. You have to learn how to get through it. And failure isn't even an option. It's a must in order to get through it and to be a success, because it teaches you that you have to be great, that you don't deserve this. Just because you put your song on Spotify, the hell with you. Nobody cares. But why should we spend time on you?
Yeah.
When you read about people who saw Springsteen in 1973, or the Rolling Stones in 64, or the Beatles in Germany, or Ed Sheeran playing in front of 5 people in some festival that nobody cared about, there was that undescribable it that people will always say, this band is going to be huge. When I saw Nirvana in 1991, about 3 weeks before Nevermind came out, I saw them in a club that had about 700 people, 600 people in. Nobody had heard any of Nevermind except for, the people that were only listening to alternative rock and Smelled Like Teen Spirit, and that you were lucky to live in a city like Toronto that had a new rock station, because most cities don't at the time, or didn't at the time. You knew that this band was going to be big. You knew that the year that they spent touring Bleach and the practice that they took to create Nevermind was going to be huge. I saw Oasis at a small club in their first time coming to Toronto, and Rock and Roll Star which came out maybe a month or two before, but you knew that the band was singing to 15 blocks down the road, and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to say that it happened few and far between. It's just different when I'm seeing a new artist, because I know that they're not really thinking sometimes, I want to get good playing live. They're thinking, how do I create great 30-second content for TikTok? And that's okay.
Yeah, it's a totally
that's
different
all
mindset.
right. It's what your audience expects from you. But sooner or later, that platform is going to go away, and you better be really great in order to survive the next platform.
Bingo. When you mentioned failure, it made me think of the fact that things aren't always going to be amazing. You're going to be on social media making posts, and the bigger you get, the meaner people can be. Now, as a PR, how do you help the artist deal with the fact that people are going to call you names? People are going to make fun of you. They're going to be awful to you. Well, how do you deal with that?
I used to, in the beginning, whenever somebody was disappointed in the cover that they were getting, I would send them what the music critics wrote about Sgt. Pepper. And I would send them what the music critics thought about Billy Joel. And I sent them articles about all of the people who didn't like Ed Sheeran, but then the sheer amount of his numbers and streams, and say, you're going to get it. Not everybody's going to love you. And like certain family members that you don't like, there might be people out there who are going to justify not liking you based on something you said or didn't say or think that you did, or some ugly photograph that you were in. And stop reading social media comments. We had a no scrolling rule in our house when Hannah was starting to get a little bit popular and a little bit more outgoing when it came down to the social media stuff. We had a no scrolling rule because I knew what people were reading. People were like, your parents should be thrown in jail for, denying that climate change is a real thing. Or is a real thing. And like, there were just people who were like, whatever, you're always going to get those kind of people, but it's hard though. You want to be liked by everybody, but it's just not possible to hire.
You want to engage with the people who are interesting and want to be involved with engaging with you in a positive way, but you have to somehow block out all that other garbage. And that's
And it's hard. You look at, even a Kim Kardashian, who has 135 million followers or however many she has at this time on Instagram. She'll get, 50,000 comments. I would venture to say that 35,000 of them are probably really horrible. Because you put the power of social media into most people's hand and they just don't know what to do with it. And most people are mean. I'm not convinced that this planet and the people that live on it are nice and flowery and happy and full of yellow and orange stars above their heads. Most people have a lot of stuff going on that they don't like. Most people don't like their jobs. Most people don't like the person they're married to. Most people don't like the kind of money that they're making. They don't get to do what they want to do, and they're angry. And we see that now with the amount of people who won't wear a mask. They feel like we're not in this for everybody, and the world is not in this for everybody, because the world is made up of everybody that have different experiences and have grown up in different societies and towns and rural areas, and who have different parents, some racist, some not, some wealthy, some not, some black, some white, some people of color, some not, some gay, some not. And so we can't just say, well, we're all going to think the same thing. When you have that, when you start thinking about something like that, you understand that not everybody is going to appreciate the things that you do, and just don't read it because they're just angry and miserable, and they're not going to buy your album anyway. They just happen to have the power. And you know what really kind of changed it for me? Because I used to be able to have this idea that like everybody has a right to speak about what they want, and everybody does, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs to hear what you have to say. Is when newspapers started cutting off the comment section on their stories, because they realized that it was just a giant cesspool of ignorance and hatred and anger. And if a newspaper was doing that, then I think it was okay to tell artists that they don't have to read the comments either.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. I've noticed that. It's all articles closed for commenting. And good. It's better for all of our mental health if we don't have to read that stuff.
It is because and that's exactly it. I mean, you figure that people would love having a comment section because it keeps people on their site longer, and people want to hate tweet and hate post, and other people just want to be look, at 11 o'clock at night when I'm getting ready for bed, I'm like, brain, let's go to bed. And then my brain said, you know what we should do? We should read 5 things on the internet that's going to get us angry. And I'm like, yes, let's go do that. And I do that because we're all into car accidents. And sometimes, I'm just glad that for the greater good of it all, look, this is a rabbit hole that we can go down, but there are people, and I'm not one of them, but there are people out there who believe that somebody like Donald Trump didn't actually create the amount of anger and hatred or racist language or all of that stuff, that it was always bubbling under. And yes, it probably was. but somebody like that actually makes it okay to go out and shout it from the rafters, which causes great grief to everybody. So closing comments off, or not reading comments, or Instagram allowing comments, or Facebook giving you more of those bad comments, knowing that you are going to read them, or showing you depressing bad news because you know that you're apt to share that more than happy news. It's a fact, but it doesn't necessarily mean that for the greater good. We all have to do that, you know?
But we used to react to that newspaper article by turning to the person next to us and having a conversation about it, which is going to be, when we talk about these things face to face, we're far more kind than we are behind a keyboard, right?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I get comments from about things on my Twitter that I know there's no way that you would say that to somebody's face. But then again, every day I'll go see a video of somebody screaming and yelling at somebody because they happen to be walking in the park. So maybe there are people out there that don't have, that wherewithal to shut it down and shut it off.
It's true. But it's
but
definitely changed.
but that's why you exist, and that's why this is so wonderful to talk to, because you can let everybody else have that space of, we need to hate on so much other stuff, or let's just talk about the really bad stuff, and I'm sure you can. I'm sure that you can go into a whole conversation of failures and misforgivings and things like that. But I think that you chose the road that not only makes people feel really good, but allows you to like yourself more, knowing that you're not a part of all this, stuff that's going on.
Now, I read a really interesting fact about your family. Your great-grandfather opened Grossman's Tavern in 1943, which is Toronto's first licensed blues bar. Is it still going to this day? And have you been involved with the bar at all?
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah, he was an interesting cat. He was a hippie way before hippies were, and loved music and loved food. So he opened up a cafeteria in Kensington Market in Toronto, which if people have been there, it's very much a close-knit community spirit. And then he wanted to have musicians play there in the mid-1940s, and got the alcohol license for that, and was one of the first in the country to mix alcohol and music, which the government thought that it was going to send the whole city into destined for hell, and they were almost right. But growing up and hearing stories about the draft dodgers coming and escaping the Vietnam War and coming to Canada, he would be housing them in the rooms upstairs above the bar. He would be allowing and doing deals with clubs in New Orleans and having artists that were from Canada play there, and artists from New Orleans come up in here. So he was a great guy all around. And he not only loved music, but he was a real mensch, that we would say in the Jewish world. And I've kind of tried, if there's one mentor that I would say that I have, both business and personal, it's him, because I realized that you don't have to be a prat to be in the music industry, and you don't have to lie and cheat and steal your way to surviving. Forget about hitting number one, because that's not even in my mindset. But the bar is still standing. I'm still really good friends with the owners. They took it over in the mid 1970s. I still have artists that play there, and I still go down every time I'm downtown just to stop by and say hi. So it's a lovely thing to have that kind of place in your heart and in your memories about the good time that you spent there as a kid, not realizing what it all meant until later on.
I'm very happy to hear that the current owners have kept it a live music venue, as those are continuously dying off, especially now.
Yeah.
But that's very encouraging that they did that. Now, who are your heroes in the business that you'd like to sit down and talk to one day? If you haven't already.
Yeah, I'd love to sit down with Paul McCartney and find out about that whole Paul is dead rumor, and find out how they did all that stuff, like with the cover of Abbey Road and the skeleton on the back of Abbey Road, and all the clues that they put in. I would love just to find out that stuff. A lot of the people that I've met, I've had amazing times with. somebody like a Bob Geldof, who was able to create something from very little and create Live Aid and Band Aid and change the world through music, is somebody that I've been honored to work with and in the past and sat down with for many, many days, just shooting the breeze with him. Hanging out with Sinead O'Connor was amazing. I thought that what she went through and the way that she was treated, not only in the music industry, but the media, after she ripped up the picture of the Pope, was something that I think we all, those people owe her a big apology for. And she was just so vibrant and happy and gracious to be around. I've just been really lucky that the people that I work with now are not just my musical heroes and heroines, but they're people that I grew up listening to that shape my musical palette, so to speak. Every time I'm working with, even a band like Honeymoon Suite, who I just marvel at, and I'm like, I can't tell you how many hundreds of hours I've watched your videos growing up on Much Music. So a lot of those artists from the 80s and 90s that I'm happy to work with. People like Biff Naked and Sass Jordan are just so unbelievably cool and hip to this day that, they're just so wonderful to work with, and they make my job so much better and so much easier, because really without those people, my job would suck. They're like, I get through the really bad days in order to work with people like that.
Oh, yeah. Sass is one of my heroes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. What food or clothing item or toy makes you nostalgic for the 90s? Or were there any trends that you didn't like?
No, there wasn't any trend I didn't like, but I got to tell you, I still fit into the pair of jeans and shirts that I wore in the 90s. In fact, I'm wearing what I'm wearing now with this jean jacket I've had for about 25 years already. I still wear the same shirts. I still wear, torn, ripped up jeans. I still look like I stepped out of that Nirvana show at the Opera House.
Ripped
still
jeans
to this
will
day.
always be in.
I haven't changed my hairstyle since 1991. I still wear glasses that I bought in the 90s. My whole life is stuck in a time warp, and I don't care. I love it.
Me too. That's why I created this show.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any recent new artists that you're working with that you want to recommend to the people right now?
Yeah. Somebody that actually reminds me of Nirvana is Dellen Gray. She's managed by Biff Naked, and she's a little bit of punk, a little bit of pop, a little bit of rock, and takes no guff from anybody. So I love working with her.
Nice.
So there's people like that. Then there's people like Jay Douglas, who's, in his mid 70s and still recording really great, brilliant reggae music. And I'm so happy to be working with him. And I'm literally working him for free just because I wanted to. There's people, there's another group called Fresh Breath that I think are doing some amazing things in the folk and the pop world. And they come from the Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo region. So there's always really great stuff. I post a lot of it on the website at thatericalper.com, and I always post the artists that I'm working with. But there's never a dull moment. I'm always working with really cool people.
Now, for the listeners out there who are interested in the career path of a PR and doing publicity, what would you tell them to do to start down that road?
If they want to go into the music industry specifically, you may not want to start there. There's always enough people out there that's looking for really good help. Might be on the cheap, but you want to work as much as you can, just doing what you love to do. So even if you're in a place that doesn't have a record label, that doesn't have a music festival, that doesn't have a promoter, start doing PR for the local animal shelter. Start doing PR for the local restaurant that's in there, that's in the area. It'll teach you how to write different things for different people. It'll teach you how to write a press release. It'll teach you how to write a bio. It'll teach you how to work with the local media. But certainly if you want to just, dive right into the music industry, there are plenty of artists that are out there that can use some good help. And maybe you don't get anything for them in the first little batch. Maybe, their expectations are a little bit high because they're now working with a publicist, no matter who it is. But you just want to keep doing what you're doing and not do something that you don't want to do. I've always said, even in the early beginning, even when I was making no money, at least I'm not bartending or working at a restaurant or doing something that I really have no business doing because I have no special talent or urge to do that. So every day that I was doing this was a day that I won. It was a day to me personally that I didn't get to do something that I hated to do. So think outside of the box a little bit. And if you want to get into publicity, there are a lot of people out there that can use a publicist that will garner you the attention. And because, the music industry is really hard. It's a really tough gig. There's a lot of people who want to get into it, but most fun things are from the outside. There's always, people with degrees in publicity. There's music industry schools. There are literally thousands of students in every country that have a degree in music industry, business and administration, and that's your competition for a job. So go create your own.
That whole conversation was very insightful, and it was a real pleasure to chat with you today, Eric. Thank you for all.
I'm so happy.
Thank you.
Naomi, you're awesome. I loved it. I love talking to you. And yeah, anytime you want to talk, I'll be here for you.
Absolutely. Let's do this again sometime.
Perfect. Excellent. Thanks so much.
All right. And you have a wonderful day.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
It was a blast talking with Eric, and I'm very grateful that he spent the time to be on the show. So thank you once again, Eric Alper. Next week's show, my special guest will be from the freestyle Latin pop amazing girl group, Sweet Sensation, Betty D. She's going to be joining me, and we're going to be talking about girl power and so much more. So stick around, keep listening to us, and follow Colin's instructions and check out our social media. Have a good one.
Social media, yeah, we've got it. Send us an email, dopenostalgiapodcast@gmail.com. Twitter, Nostalgia Dope. Or on Insta, dope_nostalgia.
This podcast is licensed by SOCAN because we believe that artists should be paid for their work.
Hey everybody, this is Quinn.
And Charlie.
And Naomi.
We got a podcast together. What's it called?
L2L.
That stands for Learning to Listen, because we talk about all kinds of stuff. What do we talk about? Sex.
Muppets.
Serial killers.
Poop.
Yeah, you got to be ready for some poop talk if you're going to listen to Learning to Listen.
It's healthy.
Hey, you can join in the conversation as well. You can find us where?
Stitcher.
Spotify.
iTunes.
Yeah, you can find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Every Tuesday, you can join us and learn to listen.
Join us for a little L2L.
Yeah, put it in your ear holes.
Yeah.